Okay, so I think that's our signal. So welcome back, everyone who is at session one, and welcome for the first time to those of you who are just joining us. I'm Richard Kravitz, UC Center Sacramento Director, and it's a pleasure to have you here at the UCCS Undergraduate Student Policy Research Showcase. This is a culmination event for us that we look forward to every term. It's an opportunity for students to demonstrate what they've learned and all the hard work that they've put in through the quarter, combining coursework and academics with experiential learning in their internships, and we celebrate that. We also celebrate the contributions of the internship hosts who made that experiential learning possible. So we're really grateful to all of you who are here with us today. So I don't think there's a need to say much more because we want to get right to it. So let's do that.
Great, and the format for today's undergraduate research showcase is that each student will go ahead and present their poster. And after each student presents, we will take one question from the audience from their internship host site. If their internship host site does not have a question, then we will open it up to our academic team. And so with that, our first student is today is Esmeralda Aldaz.
Hello, everyone. My name is Esmeralda Aldaz, and I'm a student at the University of California, Los Angeles. My project, Ancestral Language Reemergence and Sustainability Among Native California Generations, explores the relationship between language projects and language sustainability for Native California languages. California is the most linguistically diverse area in North America, but it is on track to lose that diversity, with the majority of its native languages having less than 5 documented speakers or being classified as extinct. I hypothesize that Native California language projects who have access to resources such as elders, support from Native speakers, funding, and culturally relevant curriculum can cultivate Native language reemergence and sustainability. By analyzing 4 California Native language projects, supporting evidence for and beyond my hypothesis emerged, emphasizing the importance of intergenerational relations, funding, culturally empowering curriculum, and technology. All 4 projects that I analyzed supported Native language sustainability. And this chart here, right here, indicates how each project was able to cultivate this. The Yurok language stands out for receiving the most funding and having numerically the highest language progress and fluency levels among youth and adults, the greatest number of elder involvement as well, and for being a 3-year program as opposed to a 2-year program. Yurok is classified as an awakening language currently thanks to this community project's efforts. To continue cultivating these results, I recommend allocating the $2.81 billion in funding historically invested for Native language decimation during the boarding school era to reemerge and sustain Native languages instead through projects like the aforementioned. To further this research, I'm interested in understanding how Native language sustainability efforts are being impacted by COVID-19. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Esmeralda. And so Esmeralda interned with the UC Davis School of Education, Center for Applied Policy and Education. And so if there's anyone from the center who would like to go ahead and ask a question, if you can go ahead and raise your hand. All right, and if not, we'll go ahead and take a question from our academic team.
Esmeralda, this is Maria Pantoja, your instructor for Poll 195. This is a very interesting topic and project. And I just had a question about, based on your research, do you know where the funding comes from for these types of projects and what the relevant curriculum that you mentioned looks like and how it's implemented?
Hello, Professor Maria. Thank you so much for your questions. I'll try to answer both. If I forget them, I'll just ask. But for the first question, I know that funding is allocated primarily through grants, and a major source that I looked at was the Administration for Native Americans and their language grants. So there's allocation there, and then there's also crowdsourcing that is done sometimes from communities that may not be able to apply for programs for certain funding if they don't meet certain criteria. For example, here, thankfully, the ANA provides to Native nonprofits and tribal communities. So if a community is not classified as a tribe according or recognized as a tribe federally, the ANA, from what I have researched, will still provide funding. So that's one funding source that I researched. And with respect to culturally empowering curriculum and relevant curriculum, the projects that I looked at, they incorporate within the language sustainability and bringing in using the language. They emphasize and encourage a lot of also activities with family and activities that involve historical significance, like, oh, for example, basket weaving, or different things that relate to the cosmology of each community. So that's a little bit of what I mean with respect to the empowering. So it's more than just bringing the language back. It's also about bringing back the value to one's own community to be able to be proud and want to continue the efforts to sustain the language and pass it on to more generations as well. I hope that answered the question a little bit.
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Esmeralda, and thank you, Professor Pantoja, for the question. And so our next student is Ben McDougall.
All right, is it up there?
Yes, great, thank you, Ben.
Hi, my name's Ben, and I'm a student at UC Davis. So my presentation was on the fiscal impact of the current corrections model. So what, sorry, we should consider reframing the criminal justice reform debate around the wallets of our taxpayers and those of incarcerated persons. Therefore, what is the fiscal impact on government budgets of current corrections models, and could higher education funding for those incarcerated persons reduce those costs? I hypothesize that given the rapid modernization of professions, it most certainly will, by keeping their skill sets up with what is required by the outside job market, likely reducing recidivism. I used several studies which collected hundreds of thousands of existing data points on state and federal incarceration and the impact that higher education funding had on recidivism and the cost for each incarcerated person. Whether or not they received higher education in prison was my binary independent variable, whereas for my dependent variable, I had the 3-year incarceration costs per cohort, as well as the recidivism as a result. I found that government spending overall declined by about 30% per cohort with the introduction of any higher education funding of just the bachelor's level, which was related to a 13% drop in recidivism. Most importantly, prior research that I found estimated the taxpayer saves about $4 to $5, which is a lowball estimate, just for the introduction of any level of higher education funding for these incarcerated persons. Going forward, the implications are quite clear. The current corrections model is unsustainable, both morally and economically. California should invest more heavily in education programs for incarcerated persons, in programs run by higher education professionals, as well as the necessary oversight, altogether saving the taxpayers potentially hundreds of millions of dollars. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Ben. And so this term, Ben interned with the UC Student Association. And so, and I see that we do have a question from there. So Ashraf, I went ahead and unmuted you.
Hey, Ben, thank you so much for this presentation. I wanted to ask, what do you think the current status is of trying to increase access to education for incarcerated individuals, whether you've heard of any programs internal to the state, and also what that interplay of the universities and the state could look like in the future if we were to try to achieve this objective.
Yeah, thanks, Ashraf. Off the top of my head, Pell Grant was discontinued in the 90s for incarcerated persons, but I believe to some extent that's been brought back by the last two presidential administrations. And then in terms of Cal Grant, I believe prisoners currently have access to that. What I believe it could look like would be a massive expansion with the UC and Cal States and community colleges providing resources to those community colleges, and then having it directly run by higher education professionals would avoid any potential waste, because that has been an issue with prior programs.
Thanks a lot, Ben.
Great, thank you so much, Ashraf, for the question, and thank you, Ben. And so our next student is Diana Rosso Diaz.
Sorry, I didn't unmute myself. Let me just pull it up really quick. Can you guys see my screen?
Looks great. Thank you, Diana.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Diana Rosso Diaz, and I am a student at UC Merced. The title of my project is Fighting for Affirmative Action. I believe it is very important for us to accept that our country was built on systemic racism and sexism. In order to address these issues embedded within our laws, I ask, what were the effects of Proposition 209, which created the ban of affirmative action in 1996, after it was implemented in regards to minority enrollment rate within the UC system as a whole, as well as by each respective campus? I hypothesize that we will see a decrease in UC minority enrollment in all campuses. However, I believe it will be more significant for more selected UC campuses. To gather data, I used the University of California dashboards and the University of California undergraduate experience surveys. My initial findings shows that there has been an increase in white and Asian enrollment and a decrease in Hispanic, African American, and Native American enrollment in the coming years after affirmative action was banned. The UC system as a whole had an underrepresented minority enrollment rate of 16% in 1999 and 29% in 2019. In regards to campuses based on selectivity, my findings show that in 1999, UC Berkeley's minority enrollment rate was at 14%, and as of 2019, it is now at 18%. Even though UC Merced opened only 15 years ago, it has the highest underrepresented minority enrollment rate of 61% out of all the UC campuses. In order to help resolve these issues, I suggest that we submit a reformed version of Proposition 16 onto California's next general election ballot in order to ensure that all students have an equal shot within the UC system. This concludes my presentation. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time.
Great, thank you so much, Diana. And so Diana interned this term with the UC Student Association. And so I see a question from Parshan Khosravi. So Parshan, I just went ahead and unmuted you.
Thank you, Cindy, and great presentation, Diana. My question for you is, obviously, as we're looking at this presentation, it's a new light for us, given that the Proposition 16 also failed. So given these concerning trends that you've shown in this presentation, what are some steps and actions that we could be taking at the state level to counter some of these trends in the aftermath of Prop 16?
Yeah, of course. First, I just want to say thank you for being here. But I think one thing that I'm especially passionate about is investing more into programs offered in high school that offer college readiness and help you prepare for college. I personally, in high school, I was a part of the UC Davis Upward Bound program, which is a program specifically for low-income first-generation students who want to pursue a higher education. Both me and my older brother, we went through this program all throughout high school, and we truly believe that without it, we wouldn't have gotten into the UC system. That being said, I think programs like that really help students that already have a lot of disadvantages in their life, especially some that were imposed on them through no fault of their own, such as their race or their socioeconomic status. So of course, we can't do anything at a state level. So maybe some programs that can be enforced to the federal level. But I truly think that, programs such as like the Upper Bound program, they really help students, and they do it at a personal level as well. And even after now that I'm a student, I still get reached out to by my former RAs or former members of the program. So I think that's just a really huge help that could be beneficial to other students and in other areas.
Great, thank you so much, Diana, and thank you, Parshan, for the question and for hosting our students. And so our next student is Dolores Lutban.
Hi everyone, my research title is Within the Lines, GDP Poverty and Everything Inequality. My fascination lies behind basic macroeconomic theory that states GDP equals production, which equals consumption, which equals income. Gains in economic production should be reflected in income. I hypothesize that increases in the independent variable GDP will increase income and decrease the dependent variable poverty rate in California. My methodology focused on a correlational analysis between GDP and poverty rates between 2011 to 2018 at both the county and state level to understand if gains in economic production can reduce poverty. What I found is that although increases in GDP are 3 times larger than decreases in poverty, as shown in Figure 1, there are limitations within my data to assume that a GDP increase is solely responsible for poverty decreases. Changing measures in other economic indicators, such as increasing prices and income inequality distribution, show a much stronger explanation for income growth and poverty. At the county level, the various differences between GDP per capita and income per capita shown in Figure 2 can't explain why poverty persists in an area. However, the relationship between GDP per capita and the Gini coefficient in Figure 3 indicates that any level of GDP per capita signifies a high Gini coefficient, making uneven income distribution likelier to be prevalent in California. While I cannot conclude a strong correlation between GDP and the poverty rate, I can conclude that inequity at both the state and county level exists, and that long-term policies should focus more on affordability of basic universal needs for all Californians. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Dolores. And so this term, Dolores interned with the California Department of Education in the Legislative Affairs Unit. And so if anyone from the office had a question, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand. Great, so Ellie Gardner, I just unmuted you, and if you just unmute yourself on your end, that'd be great, thank you.
Thank you so much. I have to say that one of the things we really loved about having Dolores this semester is her ability to interpret data into usable pieces. And so I want to ask Dolores, what is your one big recommendation in moving forward that can help eliminate some of this inequality based upon your research?
Thank you for asking that question, Ellie, and thank you for being here. So if you look on my graph, you can notice that in Figure 1, the poverty line between 2017 to 2018 decreased greatly. And I think part of it has to do with the minimum wage legislation that has been enacted in 2017. So when you think about it, we're really going to be seeing the effects of poverty rise because of COVID. So I think now is definitely the time to focus more on ensuring like some sort of universal basic income for Californians, or some sort of safety net that we can all use in order to reduce poverty.
Thank you so much. Can I follow up with you really quickly?
Yes.
Do you think that tying the minimum wage to a consumer price index is a good way of doing that? Or do you think that the universal income is a better one?
I think definitely tying the minimum wage to consumer price index is better, because it really shows the rate at which like prices are being increased. And what we're seeing is that while CPI rises greatly, minimum wage has not risen as fast as CPI increases.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you so much, Dolores, and thank you so much, Ellie, for the question and for hosting Dolores this term. And so, and our next student is Grace Jung.
Does that look okay?
Looks great, thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. My project is titled Remote Learning Support and Student Success at California Community Colleges, a dive into COVID-19 and transfer rates. So community colleges have experienced the steepest decline in enrollment in the 2019 to 2020 academic year with the transition to online learning. Thus, I was compelled to explore my research question: does program support for remote learning impact community college transfer rates? I hypothesize that colleges with a strong blueprint for remote learning will experience higher transfer rates. My research methodology consists of an independent variable of a 4-point index for if a community college had a remote learning specific guide, basic needs initiative, mental health resource, and computer loan program. My dependent variable is transfer rates to UC and CSUs of the 2019 to 2020 academic year. My findings reveal that 45% or 52 out of the 116 campuses meet all 4 criteria, as a higher remote learning support index correlates to a higher transfer count in both UC and CSUs. The most prominent services offered for mental health include virtual counseling, mental health workshops, 24/7 hotlines, and for basic needs include food pantries and housing assistance. Going forward, I recommend that we continue to expand remote learning support programs for underrepresented groups and develop more concrete ways to loan laptops to students, and also have better screening processes to distribute technology to those who need it most. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Grace. And so this term, Grace went ahead and interned with the California Community College Chancellor's Office. And so if anyone from the office had a question, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, I'll go ahead and unmute you. Great, David O'Brien.
Hi, Cindy, thank you. Hi, Grace. Really great research. So excited to see this and excited to share this with our research team as well. I wonder if in your recommendations, you looked at any of the budget or legislative principles that we've been working on, or any specific budget requests that you think are relevant to these, or are these intended to be a little bit more general recommendations?
Hi, David. Thank you so much for your question. Yeah, so I did, for this purposes of this research, I mostly looked at more of the general recommendations and policy suggestions, because I definitely wanted this to be something more feasible for like everyday person. But I did look at the CARES Act Student Emergency Grant. That was an important factor that drove my research, because that was a federal funding that provided financial aid grants to students, but that was an exclusive grant, which a lot of incarcerated or undocumented or international students would not be eligible for. So I wanted to look at something that would provide resources for students regardless of their background or like their eligibility, which is why I looked at more of the basic needs, mental health, and the general COVID-19 remote learning resources.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Grace. And thank you, David, for the question and for hosting Grace this term. And so our next student is Yvette Lopez Obezo.
Yes, can you see that?
Yes, although, oh, there we go. That's perfect. Thank you, Yvette.
Yes, hi everybody. Good morning. My name is Yvette Lopez Obeso. My home campus is University of California, Los Angeles. And the title of my research project is California's Rural K-12 School Districts and the Implementation of Ethnic Studies. And I'd like to start off by posing this question. When was the last time you heard anyone talk about the challenges California's rural K-12 school districts are facing with the implementation of ethnic studies in their curriculum? Through a small comparative study between 3 rural and 3 urban K-12 school districts in California, it is hypothesized that the greater amount of white students in schools means a greater absence of ethnic studies. This study also works to move away from the urban-centric perspective policymakers, researchers, and the media use when discussing the topic of ethnic studies. By comparing 3 key aspects of demographics, cost per average daily attendance rates, and California's A through G high school graduation requirements, as hypothesized, this study found a relationship between high percentages of white students and the absence of ethnic studies in California's rural K-12 school districts. Although ethnic study courses seem to be less advocated for in rural areas due to the higher concentration of white individuals in which the topics of race, class, and gender are not as critical to be invoked. Due to the continuing demographic shifts in California's rural communities, it is important for the implementation of ethnic studies in rural school districts to be further researched, discussed, and made a topic of significance, just as it is in highly populated urban school districts. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Yvette. And so Yvette interned with the California Community Colleges Student Success Center. And so if there's anyone from the office, great. Irma Castaneda, I went ahead and unmuted you. And so if you want to unmute you, there we go, perfect.
Awesome. Thank you, Yvette, for your interesting research. We really enjoyed having you as an intern this this fall season. So my question to you is, so based on what you researched, what do you think are steps that rural school districts can take to kind of overcome some of the challenges that you noted and begin to implement ethnic studies in their curriculum?
Hi, Irma. Thank you so much for being here today. And it was a great pleasure interning for the Success Center as well. I think definitely something that rural school districts need to work on is also start considering the students of color that are sitting in the classrooms along with the white students. Think about maybe how those students are feeling left out. They're not seeing themselves being represented in the curriculum that is being implemented, and what they are lacking to include and create a space for those students. And definitely, I think later on, you definitely need to start hiring people that see that possibility of that happening within the schools and sees the importance of having ethnic study courses in the classrooms and understands the true meaning behind it and the purpose. And I think it comes also within the school, of course, and just keeping more in consideration the students that are already there and the benefits that it would have on the students that are there already.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Yvette.
Great. Thank you so much, Yvette. And thank you, Irma and the California Community College Student Success Center for hosting Yvette this term. So our next student is Leslie Sanchez.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Leslie Sanchez. My home campus is University of California, Los Angeles. The title of my project is Healthy Children, the Impact of Head Start on Food Insecure Children in California. Child food insecurity is one of California's leading nutrition issues, making it one of the top 5 social determinants of health. My research question attempts to answer what the impact of Head Start programs is on child food insecurity rates across California. Given that programs like Head Start provide resources to address children's development and well-being, I hypothesize that more Head Start program locations would be related to less child food insecurity rates. To test this, I collected data on my dependent variable, which was the rate adjusted data on Head Start locations in all 58 counties, according to the US Department of Health and Human Services. I then compared this to my dependent variable of household insecurity rates based on the 2018 Feeding America Map the Meal Gap report. This data also allowed me to compare factors such as population, household income, poverty, and unemployment. My findings revealed that my hypothesis was incorrect, showing a positive correlation between Head Start locations and child food insecurity. More Head Start locations were found in counties such as Imperial County, whose higher needs were indicated by their higher levels of unemployment and poverty. Given the results, I believe California must provide additional funding and support to establish the whole child approach, and this could be done through early childhood education and community programs to really address the underlying condition, underlying contributing causes of security. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Leslie. And so this term, Leslie, intern with the Advancement Project. And if there's anyone from Advancement Project who would like to go ahead and ask Leslie a question. Great, Sedalia?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. Some slight technical difficulties on my end. Such a great job, Leslie. I would love to learn more about your insight about how your hypothesis turned out to not work out this time, and any sort of inferences that you can highlight for us.
Thank you, Sedalia. Great to have you here. Thank you for your question. So I think that Head Start programs, may be functioning as needed, but the problem is that they're not necessarily decreasing the levels of food insecurity. So, which is why the counties with the highest levels of food insecurity, that child food insecurity that you see here in Figure 4, also have the highest levels of Head Start locations, unemployment rates, and poverty. And this, as I said, this is just the counties with the higher needs. So yeah, that was my reference.
Great, thank you so much, Leslie. And Sedalia, thank you so much for the question, as well as to you and Advancement Project for hosting Leslie this term. So thank you. And then our next student is Raquel Vaca.
Hi, can you see my screen?
Not yet, Raquel. It says end of slideshow right now.
Oh, okay, let me fix that. Okay. It's not letting me. Oh, okay, I got it. Okay, do you see it?
Yes, it looks great. Thank you, Raquel.
Okay, great. So my research is called Defund Detention, the Impacts of Federal Funding on Detention Centers. And so California's 5 detention centers all receive a different amount of federal funding, and federal funding is a scarce resource, so it's important to determine whether it is a necessary and ethical investment. So my research question explores whether detention centers with more federal funding provide safety and better living conditions to their detainees. And I hypothesize that facilities that receive more federal funding per person provide higher quality services and better living conditions to their detainees. So to measure this, my independent variable is the amount of federal funding per detainee, and my dependent variable is the reported violence and medical concerns that I retrieved by comparing 2019 ICE facility inspection reports. So I found that detention centers that have more funding actually have higher rates of attempted suicide, sexual assault, hunger strikes, fights, infection rates, medical concerns, staff misconduct, and neglected grievances. So this contradicts my hypothesis because the data indicates that more funding does not provide detainees with better living conditions or any increased safety. In fact, it indicates neglect towards the occurring abuse, and also it suggests that federal funding is not being used efficiently or ethically. So for my policy recommendations, I recommend defunding detention centers and reallocating those funds towards alternatives to detention programs and establishing preventative measures to control illegal immigration as a more ethical measure. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Raquel. And so this term, Raquel interned with Political Solutions. And so I do see a question there. So Samaya.
morning. Hi, Raquel. This is Samaya with Political Solutions. Great presentation. I actually don't have any question. Just wanted to say thank you to you for your all your hard work, and it was a pleasure working with you this semester.
Thank you so much for coming. It was a pleasure for me too.
Great, thank you so much, Raquel, and thank you, Samaya, for hosting Raquel this term. And so, so since Raquel's our last student, if we want to go ahead and just we can go ahead and open it up now for questions. And that means it could be from the audience and our academic team, and it could be for any of our students that presented here today.
Yeah, well, Raquel's poster is up. Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
Thanks. Raquel, that was a great presentation. Thank you. Do you have any insight into the formula that's used to allocate funds to different detention centers? It's just interesting that there's such wide variation in funding.
Yeah, great question. So no, these, if you could see in figure 1, 4 of the 5 detention centers are private facilities. So there's not a lot of transparency with how funds are being allocated or how they're being used. So that's part of the problem that I found in my research, that there's just no transparency. We don't know how they're using these funds or why these differences range either. So yeah.
So it's not per inmate or anything like that.
Oh yeah, sorry. So they actually get paid per bed, a certain amount. Yeah, but the bed is like also guaranteed. So they get like a guaranteed amount of funding.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Raquel. Appreciate it. So, so if we want to go ahead and take questions, and it could again be from, it could be addressed to any of our students who presented today. It could be from our audience. It could also be from our academic team. If you'd like to ask a question from the audience, just go ahead and raise your hand. The academic team, just feel free to jump in.
I have a question for Grace. Hi all, my name is Paige Pelleton. Grace, I was really wondering about sort of the differential rates of transfer between the UC system and the CSU system. So I have 2 different questions. First is, how durable do you think your results are going to be in sort of a post-pandemic world? Do you see community colleges leaning more on remote learning because you found such strong transfer rates from those schools that were better off at remote learning?
Thank you for your question, Paige. Okay, so in terms of your question, I think that a lot of the colleges that that I in my research that for the 2019-2020 academic year who had high transfer rates is also large part of that is also due to how in the previous years they've always provided like a robust remote learning support program for their students, and so that kind of carried on. And so the colleges that already had that like base going on, those are the colleges who most likely had that were able to sustain these programs or build on existing programs. And so that's one thing. I think that going forward, definitely more colleges will start to adopt better resources for their students, but colleges that have already been doing this pre-COVID will be the ones who I predict will have will continue to have sustainable programs for their students. Yeah.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, I'm just curious about sort of the cost per student. How much are these community colleges spending to support their remote learning students?
Yeah, so that would depend, kind of like it would be a case by case, so campus by campus. And so I wouldn't be able to give you a specific number, but like that would really depend on each campus, how they decided to allocate their funds on specific programs. So I could get back to you if you'd like on that. But yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Paige. Other questions?
I have a question for Yvette. So I saw that in your chart, I saw that Imperial County, if I read it right, is considered a rural county and had a low percentage of white students, but didn't have ethnic studies courses. Do you did you take a look into that county and why that might be? Or are there other, issues that or challenges that rural schools also face in trying to implement ethnic studies programs?
Yes, hi, Professor. Thank you so much for your question. I definitely looked into that because I was surprised, and also because Imperial is right next to the Mexican-US border. So I was like, how is it possible that they're not implementing a single ethnic studies class? But I also think that due to it being such a small school district, and school districts do have history of not being able to have enough funding to provide even the basic needs that students need within those schools. So I think maybe it is that that school district is just not receiving enough money to expand their curriculum, to hire more teachers, for infrastructure, for buildings. So I think that future research could definitely look into that. But that was definitely a limitation for myself, is that there wasn't a database that said what ethnic studies were being offered, or why they weren't, or why not. So that is part of the reason why I chose to do this research, to just look into it a little bit more. So overall, I think that future research could definitely look more into different factors that I wasn't able to look into this time.
Great, thank you.
Perfect. And then I also had a question for Raquel. So your research found that higher funding these detention centers increase these hunger strikes and these negative sort of experiences. I was wondering why that might be happening. If you share any insight. Great presentation and project, by the way.
Thank you. I have no idea why it's happening, but it just shows that these funds aren't being used to like purchase like more staffing or like better staffing, or it's not, we have no idea like how these funds are being used or where they're being allocated towards, but we know that they're not being used efficiently. So I think that's what my research kind of shows.
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey there, Dr. Butters here from Paul 186E. I have a question for Leslie. So I know you don't have to pull your poster back up or anything like that, but I wrote down for in figure 3 there, can you just tell us more about the main takeaway from your figure 3? That was the one about insecurity and household income and stuff like that. So, but most of the poor counties have, there was, you color coded them, and most of the ones that were pretty low on the household income index that you showed us there have less than 100 Head Start locations per 100,000, but high levels of insecurity is what I took away from that. But I just wanted to hear more about your main takeaways from your figure 3, because that was something that stood out to me, but you didn't really talk about it too much. So I was just hoping to get a little extra on that. Thanks.
Yeah, so my figure 3 actually looks a lot like figure 2. And basically it's based on median incomes. And then the county with the highest level of child food insecurity was actually Imperial County, and their median income was relatively low. Oh, sorry, that was a mistake on my part. It was right, sorry. The county with the highest level of child food insecurity was actually Imperial County, like I was saying. They had one of the lowest median incomes, and it was I believe it was about around 45,000, and they had the highest level of Head Start locations as well. So as we see, as the number of Head Start locations was increasing, the child food insecurity was also increasing, and Head Start locations are meant to target low-income vulnerable populations. So I think the takeaway from that is just these counties with higher median incomes already have the resources to provide the additional support and funding. So those with lower median incomes don't have the same resources. So there's more investment in Head Start locations.
Perfect, thank you. I'm actually going to segue right into a question for Esmeralda. So on your project, we've talked about this a ton of times. You come to office hours a bunch. I really appreciate that. And it's great to see the final product you've got here. And it seemed to me that one of the big stand-up takeaway from you is places that have larger participation, or I'm sorry, languages where there's larger participation from elders and from youth are the ones that are going to move on up and become, awakening languages, or languages that are no longer dormant or dead or whatever, right? So how is it save, having a larger population? You can't just have a bigger population suddenly of elders, right? That's not how it works. There's a limited number of elders, right? So what is it that we can be doing as Californians or as communities or something that we could really get these languages back to awakening or something like that, and not just throw money at it exactly, but I was just curious on your thoughts on how we might do that without adding elders. Thanks.
That's loaded, but I think that a lot of, for example, one of the projects, the Pomo Language and Documentation Project, they are aware that, elders, especially with COVID, I'm very concerned about, elders in this time. But I think that the documentation of the language is very important. It shouldn't be the main focus of everything, but according to what I have read, but it is very important, especially with elders passing on. And what I found very interesting too in my research is that most elders don't actually speak the language, because there's been so many languages with generations that don't pass it on, but they remember how to speak it. So documenting that and working with them and with linguists has worked for some of the programs that I looked at, in order to get a structure going and be able to actually start working on having a project and being able to speak it again. So reemerge the language that has not been spoken in however many generations. So I think that will be helpful, just making sure that is structured, documented, and then if there's variations, having I forget the word, but unifying the language as much as possible, so that it can be more, so that there's less of a issues with passing it on, still respecting the variations that exist, but unifying it as much as possible.
Okay, cool. Documentation, then that makes sense. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much. All right, other questions, Paige?
Question for Ben. So Ben, it seems to be really clear from your poster, better higher education, we have better outcomes. I am curious though, is all in your idea, in your research, are all types of higher education useful for your outcome variable? And also a second question is, methodologically, how are you able to estimate the tax relief or tax savings that Californians might face for investing in higher ed?
So for the first part, while I didn't include it in my research, when I mentioned that any level of higher education funding save the taxpayers money, the numbers that I had overall were for bachelor's degrees. For inmates who receive master's or higher, and even slightly lower, like a trade degree, it was overwhelmingly increasingly positive. And then could you do the second part of your question again, just so I can fully answer that?
Yeah, my second was about how you actually go about estimating the tax relief that Californians save as a result of investment.
Yeah, so based off of the prior research, I mean, I had the estimates. It's about $4 to $5, which is actually a conservative estimate, given it only is able to measure certain costs. So if you even go off the lowest possible estimate of $4 for each dollar saved, and even if your program is massively wasteful, with half of the money being wasted, you're still saving at the lowest estimate 2 times the rate. Now, in terms of estimating how much California would save, it'd be a simple measure of a realistic level of increased funding to try it out in the state of California, specifically with one of these existing programs, seeing the amount saved, and then expanding that if it is, as it overwhelmingly the data suggests will be positive, expanding that the next time around.
Very cool, thank you.
Great, thank you, Paige. Thank you, Ben. So other questions?
Hi, I had a question for Esmeralda. I was wondering, great project. I thought that the language was really interesting. I wanted to learn more about the data that you were using. like what languages were included, where they talk to these elders. So I was wondering if you could teach me more about the data that you're using.
Yes, so I was able to find data on 4 projects. The Kawaiisu Practical Grammar Project, the Pomo Language Assessment and Documentation Project, the Say It in Samala Project, and the Yurok Community Language Project. So the data I found gave me information on the funding. It came from the Administration for Native American Language Grants specifically. And it also provided me with like how many elders were involved and what was the purpose of each project. And it also gave me like, oh, did they host classes? Did they create full-time jobs? And other things like that. And for each project, I was able to also see, like, for example, the Kawaiisu Practical Grammar Project, they were able to support 23 adults in increasing their ability to speak the native language. And for youth, 4 youth increased their ability to speak the native language. So it gave me information like that. And the Kawaiisu project is still considered critically endangered because although they did support with increasing the ability of people to speak it, there's still lower levels of people who are fluent in it. So that's important to know because they are contributing to native language sustainability in my project because there's the intergenerational aspect of them including like elders and youth and adults, and they're all like starting to like reemerge the language, but the sustainability is still yet to be seen because fluency levels are not documented yet. And that's different from, like, for example, the Yurok Community Language Project, in which 70 people achieve fluency, and that has helped it become an awakening language.
Great work. That was really interesting. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much for asking.
Great, thank you. And do we have any more questions? All right, well, if not, thank you so much for attending the UC Center Sacramento Undergraduate Research Showcase. We're so proud of the amazing work our students have accomplished this term, especially in the unprecedented times that we're in. And so congratulations to all of our students. And thank you so much to all of our internship hosts who are here with us today and who hosted a student remotely this term. We would not be able to have this internship program without you. So thank you very much, everyone, and students, great job.